David Reeves had spent 4 months collecting it. Soil samples from 3 continents, water analysis from 7 river systems, trade logs that showed a pattern too deliberate to be accidental. The toxin had no name yet in any galactic database. Earth's scientists had to build the profile from scratch, working backward from dying crops and failing harvests until they found the thread. And when they pulled it, the whole design unraveled cleanly. It led to the Varka. David was not a soldier. He had never carried a weapon in his life. He was a trade negotiator who had spent 20 years sitting across tables from people who did not want to give him anything, and he had learned that patience was sharper than any blade. He wore the same dark suit he wore to every formal session. He carried 2 data slates and a small silver case with the physical evidence samples inside. The council chamber on Verka Prime was built to impress. That was the point of it. The ceiling was 100 meters above the floor, carved from a single piece of pale volcanic rock. 12 elevated galleries curved around the central floor in a semicircle, each one belonging to a different species. The lighting came from strips of cold blue crystal embedded in the walls. Everything about it said that the people on the floor were small and the people in the galleries were large. David walked to the podium and placed his data slates on the surface. He did not look up at the galleries yet. He took a breath, then he began. He laid it out without emotion. The timeline of crop failures starting 18 months ago. The chemical signature found in irrigation water across 3 separate agricultural zones on 2 continents. The match to a compound that appeared in only one place in any galactic trade record, a Verka industrial catalog from 11 years ago, listed as a soil treatment agent and later discontinued. The shipping records showing Verka Flugu vessels passing through Earth's outer trade corridor every 40 days for the past 2 years. The statistical impossibility of all of this being coincidence. He spoke for 22 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. When he finished, he looked up. Arith was leaning back in his seat. Arith was the Verka Council speaker, tall and gruscunned, with the elongated jaw that marked his family line as old nobility. He was wearing ceremonial robes that cost more than most humans earned in a year, and he was looking at David the way someone looks at a small animal that has wandered into a room it does not belong in. Ambassador Reeves, Arith said, his voice carried through the chamber without effort. Earth has presented data before. Earth has presented complaints before. The Council has reviewed many such submissions from developing worlds. He paused to let that word settle, developing. The Council will place this matter in the standard review queue. We expect processing to take 8 to 12 standard months. You are welcome to submit any additional supporting materials to the Trade Secretariat before then. A low sound moved through several of the galleries. It was not quite laughter. It was something more relaxed than that. David looked at Arith for 3 seconds without speaking. Then he said, "Understood." He picked up his data slates. He closed the silver case. He walked across the chamber floor toward the exit. His footsteps were the only sound. He did not look back. In the corridor outside, 2 members of his small delegation fell into step beside him. One of them, a younger man named Puck, who handled communications logistics, looked at David's face and said nothing. He had worked with David long enough to know the difference between the calm of someone who had accepted defeat and the calm of someone who had already moved past the point where talking was the plan. The shuttle back to the human diplomatic vessel took 14 minutes. David sat with his hands folded in his lap and said nothing during the ride. When he stepped onto the ship, he went directly to the communications room. He sat down at the terminal. He opened a channel on a frequency that was not listed in any of Earth's official diplomatic logs. It used a rotating encryption pattern that changed every 90 seconds. He typed 11 words. They refused. No delay, no process. Begin Protocol 7. He sent it. He sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and went to find something to eat. There was nothing more for him to do tonight. Other people would be very busy now, but not him. His part, for the moment, was finished. The message traveled at standard relay speed toward Earth. In the council chamber, Arith was already speaking to the next item on the agenda. The human complaint had taken up less than 30 minutes of the session. It would not come up again in official minutes for at least 8 months, by the standard review timeline. Arith considered the matter closed. He was wrong about that. He was wrong in a way that would take him some weeks to fully understand. And by then, the understanding would come not from a diplomatic note or a formal protest, but from a series of very specific and very expensive problems that would arrive one after another with the quiet regularity of a metronome. But that was later. For now, the chamber moved on. The blue crystal lights hummed. The agenda continued. And somewhere between Earth and Varka Prime, 11 words moved through the dark at the speed of light, carrying with them the beginning of something the Galactic Council had never quite encountered before. Not a war. Something more patient than that. The first sign was the silence. Not the silence of empty space, which was normal and expected. This was the silence of things that should have been making noise and were not. 17 Varka cargo vessels operated a regular circuit through the outer asteroid corridor, carrying processed ore, chemical compounds, and sealed containers whose manifests listed them as agricultural equipment. They checked in at relay stations every 48 hours. Standard procedure. Had been for years. On the 19th day, after David Reeves walked out of the council chamber, 3 of those ships missed their check-in window. The Varka Logistics Office filed a routine delay report. Space was large. Delays happened. On the 21st day, 5 more ships went quiet. On the 23rd day, the total reached 11. No distress signals. No wreckage detected by any passing vessel. No explosion signatures in the corridor's background radiation readings. The ships were simply gone from contact, as if someone had reached out and turned them off one by one, working down a list. Admiral Druth, the Varka fleet commander responsible for the outer corridor, was not a patient man. He sent a furious demand through official channels to the human embassy on the neutral station at Reach Point 7. He used language that a diplomatic office would normally return as unacceptable. He did not care. No reply came. He sent a second message, still nothing. He sent a third, this time through the Council's official communication infrastructure, so that the message would be logged and timestamped by a neutral party. He demanded an explanation, an acknowledgement, anything. The human embassy at Reach Point 7 remained silent. Meanwhile, on the 25th day, a Varka fuel processing station in the outer belt sent a distress call. The crew reported that they had lost control of all their systems. Not a malfunction. The systems were working perfectly. They simply no longer responded to Varka command inputs. Something else had the controls. The crew was unharmed. Life support was stable. The lights were on. But the doors would not open, and the communication array would only transmit on a single frequency that connected to nothing they recognized. A rescue vessel reached the station on the 27th day. They found the crew sitting in the break room, confused but physically fine. The station had been emptied of everything that was not bolted down and some things that were. Equipment, data cores, fuel reserves, the physical archive of the station's operation logs for the past 3 years. Gone, not destroyed, taken. On one of the stripped walls, someone had left a single line of text printed on plain paper in standard Galactic script. It read, "We still have questions about the soil treatment compound." Kunsala Pull of the sullen species requested a closed emergency session. Pull was one of the quieter members of the council, a researcher by background who had spent 30 years studying conflict patterns across galactic history before entering diplomatic service. The request was filed as a security briefing rather than a public agenda item. 7 council members attended. Arith was not among them. Pale stood at the front of the small chamber and pulled up a file that his office had been quietly building for 3 weeks. He did not speak dramatically. He spoke the way someone speaks when they are more worried than they want to show. Humanity, Pale said, has been continuously at war with something for almost the entirety of their recorded history. Other species disease their own climate each other. When they were not fighting something external, they were fighting internally, and the internal conflicts often lasted generations. What is important to understand is not that they survived this. Several species have difficult histories. What is important is what they built during it. He pulled up a diagram. It showed human strategic doctrine across 6 centuries. They developed an entire field of military practice devoted not to winning battles but to making the enemy unable to continue fighting. They call different versions of it by different names: attrition, logistics warfare, economic pressure. The underlying principle is always the same. You do not need to defeat an enemy directly. You need to remove their ability to function. One of the attending counselors, a breath delegate named Mevin, said quietly, "And the missing ships, the station, are not random," Pale confirmed. Every vessel that has gone dark carries supply loads for Volkai operations in the outer sector. The fuel station that was emptied supplies the same corridor. Someone mapped their logistics network and is removing it, piece by piece, without violence, without debris, without a single thing that constitutes an act of war under council law. The room was quiet for a moment. "They are being very careful," said another delegate. "Yes," Pale said, "they are being very careful. That is the part that concerns me most." That night, Oreth received a personal message. It came through a private channel, routed through 4 different relay nodes, origin technically untraceable but practically obvious. It contained no words. It contained only a set of coordinates and a timestamp from 2 days prior. Oreth sent a scout vessel to the coordinates. The scout found the remains of a facility that did not appear on any official Volkai registry. It had been a production site. The analysis team identified trace chemical signatures consistent with the compound named in David Reeves' presentation to the council. The facility had not been bombed. It had not been burned. It had been taken apart with precision tools, component by component, until nothing remained but the shell of the building and the smell of something industrial that had once happened there. Every record, every sample, every piece of manufacturing equipment. Earth had all of it now. Oreth sat alone in his office for a long time after the report arrived. Outside his window, the cold light of Volkai Prime's star was setting over the capital. It looked the same as it always had. Nothing had visibly changed. And yet something had shifted in a way he could not quite name, the way the ground shifts just slightly before something larger follows. He told no one about the facility. Not yet. Pale had a habit of working late. His office on the neutral station at Reach Point 7 was small by Selen standards, walls lined with physical data storage units that he kept, because he did not trust anything that could be remotely wiped. He had 3 screens running at once most evenings, cross-referencing sources that most council analysts considered too old to be relevant. Military history from pre-contact civilizations. Conflict records from species that had gone quiet or gone extinct. The bones of wars that nobody was studying anymore because they were over. He had been building the human file for 11 years, not because anyone asked him to, because he had noticed something in the early contact records that he could not stop thinking about. He called it the patience variable. Every species that reached space had overcome something to get there. The Volkai had survived a planetary ice age. The Selen had survived 3 separate extinction-level asteroid events. The Breath had survived a civil war that lasted 400 years. But in every case, the survival had happened and then ended. It became history. The species moved forward and the survival pressure eased. With humans, it had not eased. Their planet was still trying to kill them when they built their first orbital platforms. Viral mutations, extreme weather, resource conflicts, geological instability. They had not solved their environment before reaching space. They had simply decided not to wait. They left with the problem still running and kept building anyway. The file Pale assembled had taken years to cross-reference properly, because humans did not have one military tradition. They had dozens, developed independently across different civilizations on a single planet, and many of them had evolved specifically to compensate for disadvantage. Small forces against large ones, limited resources against well-supplied enemies, populations under occupation fighting back without open armies. They had names for all of it, and they had been refining the techniques for centuries before they ever met another species. The report Pale prepared for the closed council session ran to 240 pages. He summarized it in 6 minutes. The delegates in the room had the expressions of people who had been handed information they would have preferred not to have. Mevin spoke first. He was one of the more pragmatic members, a breath counselor who had spent 40 years in trade negotiations and had a talent for recognizing when a situation had changed in ways that the official record had not caught up to yet. "You're saying they planned this before Reeves even walked into the chamber," Mevin said. "I'm saying the capability existed before he walked in," Pale replied. "Protocol 7 is not something you design in 3 weeks. The infrastructure for it had to have been built over time. Quietly, the diplomatic presentation was genuine. They wanted resolution, but they were not going to that chamber without a fallback already in place." "That is not how developing worlds operate," said another delegate, a thin-limbed Selari named Bren who handled outer sector economic affairs. "No," Pale agreed, "it is not." He pulled up a section of the report. It detailed a human strategic concept that translated imprecisely into galactic standard. The closest equivalent was a phrase meaning approximately, "remove the pillars before the roof falls." The idea was to target the systems that an adversary depended on rather than the adversary directly. Supply lines, communication infrastructure, financial networks, the things that made everything else work. Destroy those, and the adversary's visible strength became irrelevant because it could not be sustained. "They are not trying to defeat the Voakai," Pale said. "They are trying to make the Voakai unable to operate in the outer sector. There is a difference. One requires a war. The other requires only patience and good intelligence." Bren said, "How good is their intelligence?" Pale hesitated. That hesitation said more than his answer did. "The facility Oreth has not publicly reported," Pale said carefully, "was not in any council database. It was not in any document that Earth should have had access to through official channels. They found it anyway. They cataloged it, dismantled it, and took the evidence. Which means either they have sources inside Voakai operations that we are not aware of, or their independent intelligence work is considerably more developed than the Council has assumed." Mevin leaned back slowly in his seat. 3 days after that session, he received a visitor. He was at his private residence on the Breath Colony world of Sen, a quiet place with wide gardens and an evening sky that turned deep violet at sunset. He was sitting on the outer terrace when his house system announced a guest had arrived at the gate. No appointment, no prior contact. The identification registered as a human diplomatic credentials holder. David Reeves walked across the garden at a comfortable pace, as if he had been there before. He was wearing the same dark suit. He sat down in the chair across from Mevin without being invited to, placed a data slate on the table between them, and folded his hands. "I am not here officially," David said. Mevin looked at him. "I assumed." "The Council will hold a formal session on Earth's complaint. It will happen within the next 10 days. You will be the first delegate to request it." David's voice was even, as if he were reading a weather forecast. "You will cite procedural grounds, new material evidence requiring urgent review." Mevin said nothing, Or, David continued, I can add your name to the list I currently have in my right jacket pocket. He did not reach into the pocket. He did not need to. I am told the outer sector operations associated with your trade portfolio depend heavily on Volkai-managed transit infrastructure. That infrastructure is currently experiencing some difficulties. The violet sky deepened overhead. Mevin looked at the data slate on the table. He did not pick it up. I will need 2 days, he said. You have 1, David said. He stood, picked up the data slate and walked back across the garden. Mevin watched him go. The emergency session was filed before midnight. The chamber filled differently this time. There was no casual conversation between delegates before the session opened. No small groups gathered in the upper corridors exchanging pleasantries. People arrived, took their seats, and sat quietly. Even the administrative staff moved with a kind of careful stillness, as if the room itself had a different pressure than usual. 4 more Volkai outer sector operations had gone dark overnight. The news had spread through back channels before the official session opened, the way important information always spread when people were too concerned to wait for formal announcements. A processing relay near the Den asteroid cluster, offline. 2 communication nodes that the Volkai used for encrypted military traffic, not offline but rerouted, their signals now looping back to their own sources in a pattern that Earth's people had quietly designed to look like a technical fault, until someone looked closely enough to see that it was not. A Volkai financial transfer hub that handled payments for outer sector contracts. Its transaction logs copied entirely and distributed to 17 independent news relays across 6 systems before anyone realized the breach had happened. The financial records were the worst part. They showed, in clean numbers, payments from a Volkai industrial subsidiary to a logistics company that existed on paper only, which had been used to fund the purchase and shipping of the compound that had ended up in Earth's water systems. The chain was 4 steps long and each step had a different registered name, but the money moved in a straight line and it ended in a Volkai government account. By the time the emergency session officially opened, 3 smaller council species had already issued brief public statements saying they were reviewing their positions on the matter. The language was diplomatic and careful, but the meaning was clear. They were stepping away from the Volkai before the floor collapsed. Oreth entered the chamber and every set of eyes in the gallery tracked him. He walked to his position with his spine straight and his expression controlled. He had spent 40 years in council politics and he knew how to enter a room under pressure. He sat. He folded his hands. He waited. The session moderator called the session to order and recognized Mevin of the Breath to open proceedings. Mevin stood and delivered a prepared statement calling for immediate formal review of the evidence submitted by Earth's ambassador, citing the new material that had entered public record, and noting that the standard 8-month review timeline was no longer procedurally appropriate given the scope of the material. He was precise and unhurried. He did not look at Oreth. Oreth stood before Mevin had fully sat down. This session was convened under false urgency, Oreth said. His voice was controlled, but there was an edge underneath it that had not been there before. The materials in circulation are unverified. Their origin is suspect. Earth is conducting a campaign of deliberate disruption against a council member in good standing, and this body should be responding to that disruption rather than rewarding it with a hearing. He looked around the chamber. Fewer faces looked back with the easy agreement he was used to seeing. I move that Earth's diplomatic credentials be suspended pending investigation into hostile actions against Volkai infrastructure. I move further that Earth be formally designated as a disruptive actor under Council resolution. Every screen in the chamber changed at once. It was not a scheduled broadcast. There was no introduction, no network identifier, no moderator announcement. Every display surface in the room simply switched to the same image. the interior of a room that several delegates recognized immediately from intelligence briefings as a Volkai military command installation. One of the classified ones, the type that did not appear on public registry lists. Tier 3 security rating. Biometric locks. Located in neutral deep space, specifically to make it difficult to find. A human woman was standing in the middle of it. She was not large or imposing. She had short dark hair and was wearing a plain jacket with no markings. She stood in the center of the room with her hands at her sides and looked at the camera with an expression of complete composure. Behind her, every console in the facility was lit and active. The main tactical display showed all defense grid authorizations. Every single one listed an Earth command code. She said, "My name is Sira. I work in external operations for Earth Strategic Coordination Office." Her voice was calm and clear. "I want to assure the Council that this facility is undamaged and all Volkai personnel here have been safely relocated to a neutral holding area where they are comfortable. Nobody has been harmed." She paused. "I also want to note that I came here alone." Another pause, shorter this time. "The Council is welcome to verify the defense grid status through any independent monitoring system. The facility will remain under Earth authorization until the matter before the Council today is resolved. After that, we will hand it back, along with everything else." She looked at the camera for one more moment. Then she said, "Good luck with your session," and the feed ended. Every screen returned to the Council chamber's standard display. The room was completely silent. Orath was still standing. He had not sat down during the broadcast. Now he sat slowly, as if his legs had made the decision independently of the rest of him. His hands, folded on the desk in front of him, were very still. Bren of the Cellari leaned toward the delegate beside them and said something in a low voice. Pale, sitting in the observer section, watched Orath's face and noted the exact moment when the calculation behind the speaker's eyes shifted from calculating how to fight to calculating whether fighting remained a rational option. It was a small shift, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. Pale had been looking for it. He had been looking for it since the day David Reeves walked out of this chamber with his data slates under his arm and said nothing. The moderator called for order. Delegates began to speak. The session moved forward. Orath did not speak again that day. David Reeves came back to the Council chamber on a Tuesday. He had not announced his return. There was no formal notification sent to the Council Secretariat, no scheduled appearance on the session agenda. He simply appeared at the chamber entrance when the morning session opened, showed his diplomatic credentials to the door staff, and walked to the podium in the center of the floor. Nobody stopped him. That was different from the last time. The last time, there had been a sense in the room that the floor space was a courtesy extended to something small. Now the delegates in the galleries watched him walk to the podium, and there was no amusement in any face he could see. There was something more careful than that, something that took its time looking. He placed one document on the podium, a single printed sheet, the physical kind, not a data slate. He had carried it folded in his jacket pocket. He smoothed it flat with one hand. Then he looked up. "I am not here to present a complaint," he said. "The time for that passed some weeks ago, and I think everyone in this room understands what has happened since then. I am going to tell you what Earth wants and what Earth is prepared to do in exchange for it. That is the whole of this conversation. It should not take long." He glanced at the document. Earth requires 4 things. First, the Volkai Council delegation will issue a formal acknowledgement, entered into the permanent galactic record, that the compound introduced into Earth's agricultural water systems was a deliberate act originating from Volkai-funded operations. Not an accident. Not contamination from an unrelated source. A deliberate act. He let that sit for a moment. Second, material restitution will be paid directly to the farming communities affected on each of the 3 continents. The calculation of that amount has already been completed by an independent economic panel, and the figure is included in the document before me. It is not negotiable. One of the Voakai delegates in the upper gallery made a sound. David did not look up. Third, the Voakai seat on the Agricultural Trade Committee will be transferred to a neutral rotating appointment for a period of 20 years. Earth did not arrive at this number arbitrarily. 20 years is the time our agricultural scientists estimate it will take to fully restore soil viability in the worst affected regions. He looked up now and scanned the gallery slowly. Fourth, a formal apology will be delivered on the public galactic record, not a statement of regret, not an expression of concern about outcomes. An apology. Those are different things, and everyone here knows the difference. The chamber was very quiet. In exchange for these 4 things, David continued, Earth will return every asset currently under our operational control. The Voakai Command Station and its defense grid, the data cores, equipment, and records taken from outer sector facilities, the communication node access that our people currently hold, all of it will be handed back, intact, within 72 hours of the agreement being signed. He folded his hands on top of the document. I want to be direct about something because I think it will save time. Earth is not trying to destroy the Voakai. We have no interest in that. We are not here to humiliate anyone beyond what the factual record will do on its own. The people in my government who designed the response to what was done to our food supply were very deliberate about keeping every action we took short of an act of war. That was not because we could not do more. It was because we did not want to. We would rather have a neighbor who respects us than a ruin we used to argue with. Pale, in the Observer section, wrote something in his physical notebook. He did not write the words. He just made a small mark to remind himself of the specific tone of that last sentence. Earth has been at war with things longer than most species represented in this room have had written language, David said. We know what it costs. We know where it ends. We are not offering these terms because we are afraid of what comes next if you refuse. We are offering them because we think this is the better path and we want to walk it if you will let us. He stepped back from the podium. Mevin of the Breath spoke first. He said that the terms were proportional, that the evidence in public circulation left no procedural room for denial, and that the Council's credibility as a governing body depended on its ability to address provable harm done to a member world. He kept it short. Pale spoke second. He said only that in 11 years of studying human conflict history he had found one consistent pattern. When humans said they preferred resolution to destruction, they meant it. And when they said they would respond if pushed further, they also meant it. He suggested the Council take both statements seriously. 4 other delegates followed in support of the terms. The Voakai representative who spoke was not Orath. Orath had not come to the session. The delegate who stood was a younger official named Kale, who read a prepared statement in a flat voice that acknowledged the Voakai's responsibility for the compound program, expressed the delegation's intent to meet the restitution figure, and confirmed agreement to the committee transfer and the public apology. Kale did not look comfortable delivering it. That was not Earth's problem. The vote was called, the terms passed. David picked up the document. He folded it back along its original crease and put it in his jacket pocket. The moderator noted for the record that the agreement had been ratified, and that the formal apology would be entered into the Galactic public record within 5 business days. David thanked the chamber moderator by name. Then he stood quietly for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. He was thinking about the farms, the specific ones. He had read the reports from each region when the evidence file was being compiled, the names of the towns, the descriptions of fields that had produced food for generations going gray and dying in a season. That was what this had been about from the beginning. Not politics, not power. Just the farms. He picked up his data slates and walked out. 6 months later, a military academy on the Selen homeworld added a new course to its required curriculum. It was called Conflict Without Contact, and it was built around a single case study. The course materials included Pale's full research report, the timeline of events from the dismissed council session to the signed agreement, and an analysis of every operational decision Earth had made during the interval. The Academy's curriculum board had debated the title for 2 weeks before settling on it. One board member had suggested calling it the human method. Another had pointed out that method implied something teachable, and they were not entirely sure it was. They taught it anyway. The Galactic record now carried the full account. The formal Volkai apology had been entered on schedule, read into the record by Counselor Kale in language that was legally precise and emotionally empty, which was expected and fine. The text was there. That was what mattered. Text in the permanent record did not fade or get quietly revised. It stayed. The restitution payments moved through the financial system in 3 transfers over 40 days. Earth's Agricultural Ministry routed the funds directly to regional recovery councils in the affected areas. No government overhead, no processing fees. The money went to the places the money was supposed to go. Some of the regional councils used it to replace irrigation infrastructure. Some used it to bring in soil remediation specialists. One small council in a river valley that had been producing a specific grain variety for 200 years used theirs to fund a seed preservation program, because the original strains had been damaged, and they wanted to make sure it never happened again. The farms came back slowly, not all of them in 6 months. Some would take longer, but the process had started and it was funded, and the people doing the work knew it would finish. Sierra had been back on Earth for 4 of those 6 months. She worked out of a small office in a building that did not have a sign on the front. She filed reports, reviewed operational logs, and occasionally consulted on planning sessions for work that was not yet public. She did not give interviews. She had been offered one by a Galactic news relay that had pieced together enough of the story to know who she was and what she had done. She declined without explanation. The journalist who made the offer later described the declination as the most polite and absolute refusal they had ever received. Pale's published paper on human conflict philosophy ran to 60 pages in the academic version and was condensed to 12 pages for the Military Academy edition. The condensed version was the one people actually read. It had been downloaded from the Galactic Academic Network more than 400,000 times in its first month. Several of the downloads came from addresses registered to Volkai government institutions. Pale found that interesting and made a note of it. Orath resigned his position as council speaker 11 weeks after the agreement was signed. The official statement cited health reasons. No one in council political circles believed the health reasons. No one said so publicly, which was a form of respect that Orath had not entirely earned, but that the system extended anyway, because the system preferred clean transitions. His replacement was a younger Volkai official who had spent most of her career in economic development rather than military affairs. She requested a bilateral meeting with Earth's embassy in her first week. The meeting was held. It was described afterward by both sides as productive, which in diplomatic language meant that neither party had said anything they immediately regretted. David Reeves gave one final address to the council before returning to Earth. It was not a long speech. He stood at the same podium where he had stood twice before and looked at the same curved gallery and said what he had come to say. Earth did not arrive in galactic space looking for trouble, he said. We arrived the way we do everything, a little late, not entirely prepared, carrying problems we hadn't finished solving yet. We wanted to trade fairly and be taken seriously and contribute something. That is still what we want. He looked around the gallery. We are not going to be a quiet member who accepts whatever the room decides and thanks everyone for the consideration. We are not built that way. We have been arguing with our circumstances for a very long time and the habit is deep, but we keep our word. When we say we will do something, we do it. When we say we will not do something, we don't. That is the most important thing I can tell you about us. He picked up his data slates. If anyone in this room needs to know what happens when you poison our farms and dismiss the evidence and laugh at the person who brought it to you, the record is there now. You can read it any time. He left. There was no applause when he walked out. That was not the kind of room that applauded. But the chamber did not return to the next agenda item immediately. There was a pause, the kind that happens when a room full of people is processing something, not as a group but individually, each one sitting with a version of the same thought. The thought was roughly this: humans were not the largest species in the galaxy, or the most technologically advanced, or the oldest, or the most numerous. They did not have the fastest ships or the most powerful weapons or the deepest financial networks. What they had was a very specific kind of memory, the kind that was built over thousands of years of surviving things that should have killed them, and a very specific kind of patience, the kind that does not look like patience from the outside because it moves, slowly and quietly, and without announcing itself, toward a fixed point that it decided on a long time ago. The cold blue lights in the chamber hummed. The agenda moved on. And somewhere on Earth, in a river valley that had been quiet for 2 years, a farmer walked out into a field that was green again for the first time since the damage began, put his hand in the soil, and felt that it was good. That was the whole point. It had always been the whole point.